Power doesn't announce itself. It waits. I have mopped floors in rooms where decisions were made that killed people. I have wrung out dirty water 10 feet from men who signed death warrants between sips of imported water. I learned to make myself nothing. No eye contact, no opinions, no name that mattered. My father taught me that silence was armor. Then silence got him killed. And the night I stopped being silent, the night my hands moved before my grief could stop them, and I broke open the most fortified system in the state of Arkansas in front of the most dangerous man I had ever stood near. Everything I had buried for 3 years came rising up through the floor, like something that had always been waiting. I wasn't ready, but ready had never protected anyone I loved. Schmidt Enterprises occupied the top 4 floors of the tallest building in Little Rock, and the boardroom on the 32nd floor looked out over the Arkansas River like it owned the water itself. Maybe it did. I had cleaned that room every Tuesday and Thursday morning for 7 months, and I still couldn't tell you what exactly was traded there, only that the men who sat around that table never looked at me once. Not once. I was a blue uniform and a pair of rubber gloves. A function, not a person. That was the point. My name badge, said Diana Simmons. My social security number, my lease agreement, my employment record. All of it said Diana Simmons. I had spent 3 years building her from scratch, and she was a good woman, Diana. Quiet, reliable, invisible in all the ways that kept you breathing. I had buried Lana Lang in a storage unit in Jonesboro along with my father's notebooks, his encrypted drives, and the photograph of the two of us at his last conference in Zurich, 3 weeks before someone put a bullet in him for knowing too much and refusing to stay quiet about it. I did not think about Lana Lang. I did not let myself. That Tuesday, the board meeting ran long. I waited in the hallway with my cart, listening to the low rumble of voices through the heavy door, until one of the junior aides cracked it open and told me they needed a fresh water setup, and I could come through the back. I kept my head down. I always kept my head down. The man at the front of the room was not someone I recognized from any of my 7 months. He was standing at the display wall with the loose, expensive confidence of someone who had never once been told no and found the concept genuinely amusing. He introduced himself to the room as Roland Fitch, a cybersecurity architect out of D.C., and he was presenting what he called the most secure artificial intelligence system ever built on American soil. Unhackable, he said and smiled. Genuinely, categorically, provably unhackable. The NSA tried for 6 months. 3 private firms tried after that. The architecture doesn't have a back door because it doesn't have walls, it thinks. It responds. It learns the attack while it's happening and closes itself. He spread his hands. We are done with the era of human error. The room murmured with impressed, obedient energy. I was refilling the water station near the side credenza. My back was to the display wall, but I could see the system's interface reflected in the floor-to-ceiling glass of the window beside me, the river gray and wide beyond it, and something in the reflection snagged me. A pattern in the authentication layer. A sequence in the rotation timing that I recognized not because I had studied the system, but because my father had written about its predecessor in a notebook I had read so many times I could recite it from memory, like a prayer. Roland Fitch leaned back and said, $10 million. Wired immediately to anyone in this room who can get inside. I'm feeling generous.
He laughed.
The room laughed. Go ahead.
Anyone.
Try. My hands had already set down the water pitcher. I have asked myself since then what it was: ego, grief, some stubborn inherited reflex that my father passed to me the way other fathers pass blue eyes or a talent for music. I don't have a clean answer. I only know that my body made a decision my mind hadn't approved yet, and I was already moving toward the terminal at the edge of the presentation table before I understood what I was doing. Fitch saw me first. Oh, by all means, he said, with the particular cruelty of a man who has never been surprised. The cleaning lady wants a turn. Someone laughed. I sat down. I did not look at anyone. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. My father's sequence, adapted, threaded through the system's own learning architecture and turned gently back against itself like a key made from the lock. The screen changed. A single line of text appeared. Access granted. The room did not make a sound. I became aware, slowly, of the quality of the silence. It was not ordinary silence. It was the kind that happens when something irreversible has just occurred, and everyone in the room knows it, and no one has yet decided what to do. Then, from the head of the table, I felt it before I heard it, the particular weight of attention that belongs to someone accustomed to being the most powerful thing in any given space. I looked up. Peter Schmidt had not moved from his chair. He was pale in the way that had nothing to do with health, with eyes the color of deep water on an overcast day, and he was looking at me with an expression I had not seen directed at my face in 3 years. Not threat, not suspicion, recognition. He reached into his jacket. He set a check on the table and slid it, slowly, across the mahogany toward me. I looked down at the number. $10 million. His handwriting was very still, very certain, the way old things write, like time had never once rushed them. Come work for me instead, he said quietly. And the room, still frozen, waited to see what a woman who had spent 3 years being nobody would do with the first moment someone saw exactly who she was. He didn't wait for my answer. He simply stood, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the boardroom as though the matter was already settled, as though he had seen something in me that I hadn't yet agreed to show him, and agreement was a formality he had already moved past. I sat there for another moment with the check in front of me and $10 million worth of silence pressing down on my chest, and I thought about my father. I thought about the last phone call 3 years ago when he told me to stop using my real name, stop using my real cards, stop being Lana Lang in any way that left a traceable mark. I thought about how careful I had been, how thoroughly I had erased myself. And then I looked down at my rubber gloves, still on my hands, and I understood that careful had just run out of runway. Peter Schmidt's private offices occupied the entire 31st floor, and they looked nothing like the boardroom above. The boardroom was performance, mahogany and glass, and the theater of power. This was something older. Deep shelving lined with physical books that had no business existing outside of a museum. A fireplace, real and burning, even in October's stubborn Arkansas heat. Equipment I recognized and equipment I had never seen, terminals that hummed with a frequency that felt less like electricity and more like intent. He poured 2 glasses of something amber and set one in front of me without asking. You used a recursive mirror exploit, he said, threaded through the system's own learning cycle. He sat down across from me. Your father's work. The '09 white paper on adaptive encryption. He never published the 2nd volume. He paused. I read the first. I did not touch my glass. Who are you? Someone who has been watching a great deal of talent go to waste with a mop, he said. There was no cruelty in it. Just the flat, patient delivery of a man who had watched centuries of human potential squander itself and found the whole thing genuinely regrettable. The archive I need decoded has resisted every firm I've hired for 4 years. It's not a matter of processing power. It's a matter of understanding the mind that built it. He looked at me steadily. Your father built it. I believe you are the only person alive who can get inside. The fire crackled. Outside, the river moved in the dark, slow and certain, the way water moves when it has all the time in the world. I thought about my storage unit in Jonesboro, his notebooks, his voice on that last phone call, already knowing, I think, that it was the last one. Stop being Lana. Be nobody. Be safe. I had done exactly that. And it had not kept me safe. It had just kept me alone. If I say no, I said, then I wire the 10 million, and you walk out the way you came in. He said it without hesitation, and I believed him, which was somehow more unsettling than a threat would have been. But Diana Simmons's employment record ends tonight either way. The people who killed your father know you exist. They've been patient. I don't recommend testing how much longer that patience holds. He wasn't wrong. I had felt it for months, not seen it, not confirmed it, but felt it the way you feel a room has been entered before you turn the light on. Some slow-moving awareness that the perimeter I had built around my invisible life was not as solid as I needed it to be. I picked up the glass. I didn't drink it. I just held it. What's in the archive? I asked. Names, he said. Payments. Decisions that were never supposed to see documentation. Every senator, governor, judge, and mayor in this country who ever traded a vote for a wire transfer or a favor for a silence. He tilted his head slightly. And possibly the name of the man who ordered your father's death. I set the glass down very carefully so my hand wouldn't shake. Show me the first layer, I said. We started that night, and we worked until 4 a.m, the fire burning lower, the city below going quiet the way Little Rock goes quiet, not empty, just turned inward, saving itself for tomorrow. The archive was extraordinary. I understood within the first hour why 4 years and 4 firms had failed. It wasn't built to resist brute force. It was built to resist impatience. Every layer assumed the person trying to enter it would eventually grow frustrated and take a shortcut. Every shortcut was a trap. My father had built something that could only be opened by someone willing to slow down. I slowed down. Peter worked across the table from me, reviewing the architectural diagrams I decoded, cross-referencing them against his own records, and we said very little that wasn't necessary. But I was aware of him in the way you become aware of something that has been in the room longer than the room itself, a specific kind of gravity that doesn't announce itself, just steadily rearranges everything around it. Once, near midnight, he set a cup of coffee beside my keyboard without a word, and the small, quiet consideration of it hit me somewhere so unguarded that I had to look away. I had not been taken care of in 3 years. Not in any form. Not even in something as simple as coffee placed beside a cold hand, without being asked. I told myself it meant nothing. I was good at telling myself things. But I felt something loosen in my chest that night, small, cautious, like a window opened in a room that had been sealed for a very long time. I didn't name it. I wasn't ready to name it. I just kept working and let the warmth from the cup move slowly into my palms, and tried not to notice how much I had missed being somewhere that felt, against every reason, like I was allowed to exist. 3 weeks in, I stopped counting the hours I spent in that room. The archive had its own logic, its own rhythm, and once I found the frequency of it, the particular patience my father had built into every gate, every layered silence between data points, I couldn't unfind it. It was like hearing a piece of music you had forgotten you knew. Your body remembers before your mind does. Your fingers find the notes before you've consciously placed them. I decoded names I recognized from television. Names I recognized from headlines. A federal judge in Fayetteville whose rulings on land rights had baffled legal analysts for a decade. The archive explained every one of them in 3 columns: date, amount, account. A state senator whose education reform bill had died mysteriously in committee 2 years running. The archive held 17 payments to the man who killed it, each one timed to the week before the vote. A general whose promotion had been fast-tracked over 4 more qualified candidates. I found the letter of arrangement, signed, witnessed, filed. The archive was not a collection of secrets. It was a history of the world told honestly, and the honesty of it was devastating. I would work until my eyes burned, and then I would sit back and breathe through the weight of what I was holding. All this evidence of how thoroughly ordinary the machinery of corruption was. No drama in these files. No villains wringing their hands. Just transfers. Just agreements. Just the quiet, administrative dismantling of every institution my father had believed in enough to die protecting. I thought about him constantly in those weeks. Not with the sharp, breathless grief that had lived in my chest for 3 years, but with something slower and harder to name. The particular ache of understanding someone more completely after they are gone than you ever did while they were present. He had known. He had sat with all of this, and he had known exactly what it would cost him to say no, and he had said no anyway, and I had never fully understood that choice until I was sitting inside the thing he'd refused to protect. I understood it now, and it broke me open in ways I didn't have language for. It was a Tuesday night past midnight. The rest of the floor was empty. Peter at a meeting I hadn't been told the details of. The building settling around me in the way old buildings do. Small sounds, quiet shifts, the structure adjusting to the cold coming off the river. I was 3 layers deep in a subfolder I had been working toward for days, peeling back an encryption sequence that had been designed to look like a dead end from every angle except one. I found the one. I always found the one.
My father made sure of that.
I opened the file, and I saw his name. Dr. Raymond Lang, consultant. Threat classification, active. Resolution, authorized. My hands stopped moving. Below it, a contract. Clean, bureaucratic, the language of it so ordinary that it took me a full minute to understand what I was reading. A payment authorization. A chain of approvals, each one initialed, each one dated. And at the top of the chain, a name I recognized not from the archive but from the news, from campaign signs I had passed on Arkansas highways, from a face that smiled from billboards outside Little Rock with the easy confidence of a man who had never once been held to account for anything. Senator Gareth Pryor, 3-term incumbent, ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. A man my father had been asked to help and had refused because what he was being asked to protect was not intelligence. It was evidence of a crime so large it would have ended careers from the State House to the White House, and my father had looked at it and said no. And Gareth Pryor had signed his name to a document authorizing my father's death the same week he gave a speech on the Senate floor about the importance of protecting American lives. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the fire to burn lower. Long enough for the cold to find its way in through the glass. Long enough that when I heard the elevator open and Peter's quiet footsteps cross the room, I didn't move, didn't turn, couldn't make myself do anything except keep staring at my father's name on a screen that had been waiting patiently for 3 years for someone with the right key to find it. He didn't say anything at first. He came around the side of the desk and he looked at the screen, and I watched his expression in the reflection of the window, something crossing it that wasn't surprise, which told me he had suspected, which told me he had let me find this myself rather than hand it to me, and I understood why, even through everything else I was feeling. Some things you have to find with your own hands. Being told is never the same as knowing. He pulled a chair from across the room and set it beside me and sat down. He didn't take the keyboard. He didn't reach for the screen. He didn't offer me words, which was the most humane thing anyone had done for me in as long as I could remember, because there were no words adequate to this moment, and he was old enough to know it. He just sat,
Present. Steady.
close enough that I could feel the particular stillness of him, that quality he carried that was not coldness but something more like depth, like standing at the edge of water that has no visible bottom. And I put my face in my hands. I didn't sob. I had no sobs left. Grief had hollowed those out in the first year. What came out of me was quieter, and worse, the kind of crying that sounds almost like breathing, the kind that happens when you have been holding something so heavy for so long that your body simply stops pretending it isn't there. He didn't move.
He didn't speak.
He just stayed, and that was everything, and I hated how much I needed it, and I let myself need it anyway. Because I was old enough now to know that sometimes the bravest thing is not the fight. Sometimes it is simply allowing yourself to be witnessed in the moment when you finally understand what you lost, and accepting that someone is willing to sit in that with you without trying to make it smaller than it is. Outside, the river kept moving. Below us, Little Rock kept its secrets and its sleep. And inside me, something that had been frozen for 3 years began, slowly and painfully, like ice giving way in early spring, to break. He never spoke about what he found in the building's lower levels that night. He didn't need to. I had learned, over the weeks of working beside him, that Peter Schmidt communicated volumes through what he chose not to say, and the way he moved through the door at 1:30 in the morning, quiet and certain, and already reading the room before he was fully inside it, told me enough. Something had come to the edge of us, and he had gone to meet it. I had been at the terminal when the building's security system threw its first alert, a soft pulse on the secondary monitor, the kind that doesn't trigger alarms, the kind designed to inform rather than panic.
A probe.
Something testing the lower perimeter, methodical and patient, the way professionals move when they don't want to be noticed, but aren't particularly afraid of being found. I had watched the signal and felt the cold move through me that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. I knew that patience. I had grown up inside it. My father used to say that amateurs made noise and professionals made silence, and the silence on that monitor was very, very professional. Peter had seen it at the same moment. He said nothing to me. He simply stood, adjusted nothing about himself, and walked out. And I sat alone in the tower above Little Rock and waited, and the waiting was its own particular kind of education, because I realized, sitting there, that I was afraid. Not for myself. I had made a certain kind of peace with danger where it concerned my own life. What moved through me in those 40 minutes was something I hadn't felt in 3 years, a fear that had someone else's name on it, and that terrified me more than anything the archive had shown me. I was not ready for that. I was not ready for him to matter. He came back at 2:15. No visible damage. No change in his bearing. No concession to whatever had happened in the dark below us. He crossed the room and poured himself a glass of water. Water, not whiskey, which told me something, and stood at the window for a moment, looking out at the river. It was a probe, he said. Automated. Triggered remotely. He turned. Someone wanted to know if the building systems were being actively monitored. He paused. They now know that they are. Prior, I said. He didn't confirm or deny it. He didn't have to. What I noticed in the silence that followed was the way he was looking at me. Not the way he looked at the archive, not the considered, analytical attention of someone assessing a problem. This was different. This was the look of someone who had just come back from something and found, upon returning, that the room contained more than they had left in it. I had not moved from my chair. I was still in the same position he'd left me in, feet on the floor, hands in my lap, the glow of the monitor on my face. But something in the arithmetic of the room had shifted, and we both felt it, and neither of us named it. I am not a young woman standing at the beginning of something, looking at a beautiful man and mistaking electricity for destiny. I have been in love. I have watched love calcify under the pressure of ordinary life, and I know what attraction is and what it costs, and I know better than to romanticize the specific vulnerability of 2 people alone in a building at 2 in the morning after danger has just passed close enough to brush them both. I know all of that.
I knew it then. And still.
There was something about the way he had gone without hesitation, without discussion, without arming himself in any way I could see, as though the dark held nothing he had not already mastered, that had moved something in me I had no clean word for. Not admiration exactly. Not desire exactly. Something older than both. The recognition of a quality in another person that you have only ever seen in people the world has failed to break. My father had that quality. He walked toward hard things without performing the walking. He was simply already in motion before the fear had finished forming.
Peter had that.
I sat with the knowledge of it and said nothing, because I was old enough to understand that some things, once spoken, rearrange everything around them permanently, and I was not ready for permanent. I was not sure I would ever be ready. He moved to his side of the desk. He sat. He opened the document he had been reviewing before the alert, as though the last 40 minutes were simply weather that had passed. But before his eyes dropped to the page, they held mine for just a moment longer than necessary. Just long enough. I looked away first. I turned back to the archive. I found the next encrypted layer, and I began carefully to work my way inside it, and I used everything I had, every piece of focus, every learned discipline, to stay in the task and not in the feeling. It mostly worked. What didn't work was the quiet. Because the quiet between us had changed texture, and I felt it the way you feel a scar you've stopped thinking about, suddenly, unexpectedly, in the place where something once broke and healed imperfectly, and you had almost convinced yourself no longer hurt. The fire had burned to coals. The river moved below us, indifferent and eternal. And I kept working, and he kept working, and the space between us held something neither of us was willing to disturb. Some moments you don't name. You just carry them forward, carefully, the way you carry something you already know is fragile. The way you carry something you're afraid, if you look at it directly, you might finally have to admit you can't afford to lose. I have replayed that night so many times that the memory has worn smooth in places, like a stone carried too long in a closed fist. I know every sequence of it. I know the order of sounds, the order of failures, the exact moment I understood what was happening, and the exact moment I understood I could not stop it. What I have never been able to smooth over is the end of it. That part stays sharp. That part will always stay sharp. It came at 11:47 on a Wednesday night, 6 weeks after the probe, which in retrospect was never a probe. It was a measurement. They were calculating response time, mapping the building's active monitoring patterns, finding the window. They found it. 3 angles simultaneous: the east stairwell, the service elevator shaft, and a frequency pulse through the building's own security infrastructure that turned our early warning system briefly, surgically blind. Briefly was enough. I heard the first impact 2 floors below us and knew immediately that this was not a warning. The quality of it was different, purposeful, contained, the sound of people who had done this before and intended to finish it. I was already moving toward the door when Peter appeared in the interior hallway, and the look on his face stopped me for half a second because I had never seen it before. Not fear, but something adjacent to it. The look of someone who has calculated the variables and found the arithmetic coming out wrong. "Stay in the server room," he said. "Lock the inner door. Do not open it for anyone." Peter. Diana. He said my name, my real name, Lana. He never called me Diana, not once in all those weeks, and the weight of it in his voice was a whole conversation I didn't have time to refuse. He moved past me toward the east corridor, and was gone into the dark before I had finished understanding that I was going to disobey him. I gave him 40 seconds. Then I followed. I found him on the landing between 31 and 32, and what I found stopped the breath in my body. He was upright, which was the first lie the scene told me. He was standing with one hand against the wall and the other pressed to his side, and the wound, I had seen wounds in the archive's documentation, clinical photographs, evidence files, but this was different. The entry point was wrong. Too precise. Too specific. Whatever they had used, it was not designed to kill a man. It was designed to kill what Peter was, and whoever had sent it here tonight had known exactly what Peter was. His face, when he turned it toward me, was the face of someone choosing very carefully what to do with the time that remains. "I told you to stay," he said. "I know," I said. I crossed the landing and I put my hands on either side of the wound, and I already knew, the way you know things you can't afford to know, that there was nothing my hands could do here. How bad? I said, not really asking. Bad, he said, not really answering. I felt his weight shift and I took it, braced myself against the wall, let him lean into me, and the physical reality of him, the solidity, the particular gravity of a presence that pressed into my chest like a goodbye I hadn't consented to. There's a drive, he said, his voice still controlled, still Peter, still infuriatingly steady. In the desk. Third drawer. It has everything I could gather on Pryor's network.
Take it.
When this is over, use it however you need to.
Stop, I said.
Stop doing that. Stop managing the aftermath. Someone has to. Not yet. My voice broke on those two words, and I let it break. I was past performing composure. Not yet. He was quiet for a moment. Outside, I could hear the building's suppressed security system beginning to reassert itself. Peter's people, somewhere, doing what Peter's people did. The threat was being handled. It had always been the threat to him specifically, precisely him, and it had done what it came to do. He lifted his hand from the wound. He looked at his palm in the dim light of the stairwell. Then he looked at me with an expression I will carry with me until whatever end I meet, because it was the look of a man who has made a decision that costs him everything and has made it anyway, cleanly, without reservation. This will change you, he said quietly. What I'm about to give you. You should know that before you accept it. You don't have to. I understood what he meant. I understood completely. Will it let me finish what you started? I asked. Yes. Then I'm not choosing for me, I said. I'm choosing for him. For my father. Something moved through Peter's eyes that I think, if I am being truthful, was love. Not the love of weeks, not the love of proximity and shared late nights, but something older that had recognized itself and was grateful, at the end, to have been recognized in return. He pressed his wrist to my lips, and I felt it, centuries, pouring into me like a tide coming in after an impossibly long time at sea. Not violence, not invasion. A transfer, careful and deliberate, the way you hand something precious to the only person you trust to hold it. I held him while the tide settled. I held him while his breathing changed. I held him while little rocks shimmered below us through the glass. Every light on the river, every reflection, the whole small beautiful city going about its ordinary Wednesday night entirely unaware that something ancient and irreplaceable was leaving the world above it. His eyes closed slowly, not like sleep, like a decision, fully made, arrived at with complete peace. I did not let go. I stayed on that landing with my arms around him until the quiet was absolute and the river kept moving and the lights kept burning, and I understood for the second time in my life what it meant to be left behind by someone who chose, when it mattered, to spend themselves entirely on someone else. My father had done that. Now Peter. I sat in that truth and let it be as large as it was. Then, when I was ready, not healed, not resolved, not anything so clean as that, but ready, I stood up. I went to the desk. I found the drive in the third drawer. And I began. Grief, I have learned, does not follow a schedule. It does not respect the work you have to do, or the clarity you need to do it. It arrives when it arrives, in the middle of a task, in the silence after a door closes, in the specific quality of light on a river at 6 a.m. when you have not slept and the city below you is just beginning to remember itself. I gave myself 3 days. I am not sure that was enough. I am not sure any number would have been enough. But 3 days was what I allowed, and on the fourth morning I washed my face, pulled my hair back, sat down at the terminal, and opened the drive. I did not let myself look at his chair. Not yet. The fixer in Bentonville was named Trent Okafor, and he had been coordinating threat logistics for Pryor's network for 11 years. He believed he was invisible because he had never once done anything himself. He arranged, he connected, he facilitated, and he kept his hands technically clean and his name technically absent from every document that mattered. My father built the archive. He understood that technically absent was not the same as gone. I found Trent through a payment chain in the archive's fourth layer, a series of transfers routed through 3 shell companies, each one a degree of separation from the next, the whole structure designed to collapse into ambiguity if any single node was pulled. But my father hadn't built a structure you could pull nodes from. He'd built something that held its shape no matter which direction you approached it from. Every thread led somewhere. Every somewhere led to a name. I drove to Bentonville on a Tuesday. I did not rush. I had learned somewhere in the months since the stairwell that the version of me that rushed things was the version that was still afraid, and I was no longer operating from fear. Fear had been replaced by something quieter and more durable. Not anger. Anger is loud and exhausts itself. What I carried was closer to clarity. The specific, settled knowledge of what needed to happen and the willingness to be the person who made it happen. I will not describe what occurred in Bentonville in detail. What I will say is that Trent Okafor had a conversation that morning that fundamentally altered the remaining trajectory of his life. He understood by the end of it that the network he had spent 11 years serving had already been fully mapped, fully documented, and fully placed in the hands of someone who had nothing left to lose and therefore nothing left to be threatened with. That understanding was enough. The handler in Hot Springs took longer. Her name was Vivian Cross, and she was more careful than Trent, smarter than most of the network, and she had survived this long by maintaining exactly 2 things: distance from the actual decisions and proximity to the people who made them. She knew where the bodies were, metaphorically and otherwise, and she had kept herself essential by knowing and never telling. I had the archive. I didn't need her to tell me anything. What I needed from Vivian was simpler. I needed her to understand that the leverage she had held over other people for a decade now had a counterweight, and that counterweight was me, and I did not negotiate. She looked at the files I placed in front of her, and she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "Who are you?" I told her my real name. All of it. I watched her recognize it. Watched the recognition move through her face like weather. "Raymond Lang's daughter," she said. "Yes," I said. She looked at the files again. Then she looked at me. And something passed between us that I have thought about since, some complicated female recognition of what it costs to sit across a table from the machine that destroyed your family and refused to be destroyed by it. She was not a good person. She had made choices I would not make. But in that moment, I think she saw something in me that she had once had and lost, and the losing of it had led her incrementally, and then all at once, to the table where she now sat. She cooperated fully. The senator's chief of staff I found in a parked car on a street outside the Capitol building in Washington on a gray November morning, 17 minutes before he was due in a briefing. His name was Clifford Hume, and he was meticulous and ambitious and had never, I think, genuinely believed he would be found, because he had believed completely in Senator Pryor's invulnerability. I sent the first file to 3 journalists before I got out of the car. I sent the rest to a federal prosecutor in Little Rock whose name appeared in the archive only once, on a list titled Those Who Refused. People who had been offered the arrangement and said no. People like my father, scattered through the documentation like small, quiet acts of resistance that the network had noted and moved around and ultimately underestimated. I found the hitman in room 7 of a motel outside Fayetteville on a Thursday evening in December, and I will only say this. He had spent 7 months believing that nobody was looking for him because nobody knew to look for Lana Lang. He was the last one. I drove back to Little Rock in the dark, and I rode the elevator to the 31st floor, and I sat down in Peter's chair. I had avoided it for months. Not out of reverence, out of the knowledge that sitting in it would mean something I wasn't ready to mean. That it would be a decision, not a gesture. I sat in it now, and I let it mean what it meant. I opened the archive one final time. Not to decode. Not to search. I sat with the full weight of what it contained. Every name, every payment, every carefully arranged silence, and I made decisions. What the world needed to see. What needed to stay buried not to protect the guilty, but to protect the ones the guilty had endangered. What was evidence and what was weapon, and the difference between the two, which is finer than people imagine and more important than almost anything. Power, I understood now, sitting in that chair above the river, is not the loudest thing in the room. It is not the most frightening.
It is not the thing that takes.
It is the thing that decides what survives. My father knew that. He died for it. Peter knew it too. He gave me everything he was so that I could stand in the place where that knowledge lived and do what neither of them could finish. There are women in this city who carry things no one else can see, who survived losses that reshaped them permanently and kept moving anyway, not because the moving was easy, but because stopping would have meant that everything taken from them had won. I am one of them. I recognize the others when I pass them, something in the eyes, something in the way they hold themselves, a specific quality of stillness that comes not from peace but from having passed through the fire and chosen, on the other side of it, to remain. If you recognize something in this story, in Diana, in Lana, in the woman who mopped floors to survive and sat in a king's chair to become herself, then you already know where you belong. Don't let this feeling slip into the noise.
Subscribe.
Come back. There are more of us here than you think, and these stories exist for exactly this, so that you feel less alone in the parts of yourself that are the most difficult and the most true to name. I am Lana Lang. I am my father's daughter. I am what Peter Schmidt saw in a boardroom before I saw it in myself. And I am, finally, no longer hiding.